Let's all welcome, I promised I would try not to butcher this, Arkadiy Tetelman with concrete steps to create a security culture.
Can you guys hear me? Cool. So before I jump right in, I just wanted to start off with a question to you all. How many of you have had trouble convincing an engineering team to apply some sort of update, patch some sort of software, make some sort of process change? You're trying to tell them this thing is important. They're saying, we don't care. We don't want to do the thing. How many people, show of hands, have had that happen? Most people probably. So this talk, Concrete Steps to Create a Culture of Security, is, I think, my attempt to solve this problem. So specifically, we're going to talk about why does it matter? Why does it matter to have a culture of security, and what does that really mean? I'm going to jump into concrete examples of things that I do at my organization that you can do at your organization. That'll take up the majority of the time. Then I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about guiding principles, things that if you wanted to try and do something new at your organization, what would that look like? What are the things that I'm thinking about when I try to foster this culture of security? And then we're going to talk a little bit about measuring success and what that means, and hopefully time for questions at the end. Really briefly about me, who am I? My name is Arkadiy Tetelman. I work on building the security program at Lob, a small startup. Before that, I worked on AppSec at Airbnb and Twitter. And if you want to know a fun fact about me, I don't know how to ride a bike. That's really true. You're welcome to roast me after the talk. Okay, so why does security culture matter? Well, for starters, I think that most security work is not actually done by the security team. If you think about all of the work that's going on in your organization, I mentioned a few: patching software, updating libraries, resolving bug bounty reports, resolving pen test reports. Sometimes it's going to be the security work doing that team, but most of the time not. I think most of the time it's going to be the regular product or engineering teams implementing those fixes. Similar things for account and product security features like 2FA, OAuth, SAML, et cetera. Most of the time it's going to be other engineering organizations doing that work. The security team has a central facilitating role to play, and they'll do a lot of other important work, but most of the fixing these vulnerabilities is usually done by somebody else. And the corollary to that is that I think that the security team has to work through influence. You're asking all these other teams to do work on your behalf. You're saying, hey, please fix this thing, please patch this software. It's very important, but you're not in their reporting chain. You can't tell them to do the thing. You can't say, I need this done by X date. Sometimes you can, but most of the time you're just trying to convince other teams to care about the things that you care about. And that's very hard to do, to get someone else to willingly take on work that is not, they didn't plan for that work, and this vulnerability came up and now they need to resolve it. Nobody wants to do that. So I think that's the first reason that security culture really matters a lot, is when you do have a strong culture, when people can see all the work that you're putting in and all the transparency that you're providing with some of the examples that I'll run through, they understand that it is important and they're more willing to work with you. So you have less friction and less resistance and pushback from these teams when you ask them to do something important. The second reason I think is employees are really your eyes and ears on the ground. There's going to be all sorts of things going on all the time that you just don't have visibility into. I've had employees come to me with things from, there's a password in a Google Doc, to someone sent out an email with this sensitive PII information, to someone's trying to build a new feature, a new product, and one of their peers will say, hey, did this run through security review? Can you get this reviewed? Right? You want people to volunteer information to you, not to force them or install gates or processes. Like, it's better if people just volunteer information to you, and when you have a strong culture of security, they will do that. Next up, inspire people to not bypass controls. It would be really great if all of the controls that you put into place were just rock solid, you can't get around them. That's not always going to be the case. A lot of times when you introduce some sort of friction, which is unfortunate when you have to, but when you introduce that friction, people will often try and find a way to work around it because it breaks their workflow somehow. It introduces inconvenience for them. And if you are regularly sending out these updates and showing people why it's important, they're not going to do that, hopefully. And the last one is build social capital. I mentioned that not all security updates are going to be transparent and invisible. There's a lot of times where you're going to introduce some sort of breaking change, or there's going to be some sort of trade-off. Security is all about trade-offs. And so you're going to want to introduce some change and introduce, as an example, you want to enforce 2FA. You want all employees to only be able to log in through 2FA. And some functions in your company probably don't want to do that. They don't want to deal with that. They might not understand why it's important, or they don't like that it takes longer to log in. And when you are very visible with your work and sending out updates all the time and doing these other examples, you're building social capital that you can later use. You can spend it as if it's currency to implement the changes that you want to implement within your organization. So those are the reasons why I think it matters. Now I just want to run into 8 concrete examples of things that I do at my organization. First one is security champions. I think this is really common. That's why I wanted to start with it. A lot of companies do this. There's many different versions of this. Depends on the organization. At larger organizations, you'll often see security teams embedded within a product team, and they're going to be the go-to person for any security questions there. If they have to escalate to the central security team, they'll do that. That works well at larger companies. My company is pretty small. We're only 70 people. So our security champions program is literally just a Google group. It's a security enthusiast interest group. And I'll just send out discussion topics, things that I think might be interesting for people that they might get value out of, and we'll kind of discuss it. It doesn't have to be a big, heavy thing. It's like very lightweight. And I just email a few lines every now and then. So security champions, pretty popular. This next one I call Fireside Bug Bounty. It's my #1 favorite thing. It's my favorite thing that I'm going to talk about in my slides. And for those of you who run a bug bounty program, when you receive a valid report that you triage and it's a real report, I like to send out a detailed write-up of what that report was and what the impact was. So the text of this email doesn't really matter if you can't read it. I just wanted to include an example picture, but I sent out an email that said, hey, here's this issue that we saw, and here were the implications of that. And I'll always follow the exact same formula for these. I'll start off with a description of what the bug is, how to exploit it. I'll include a proof of concept. If applicable, here's what the payload looks like, here's what the request looks like. I'll talk about the impact of the bug. What could someone do if they had exploited this? What data would they have access to? What else might they have access to? I'll talk about fixing this particular instance, and I'll always give props to the person who did fix the bug. I'll link their pull request or their code if applicable. I'll say, if they did a particularly good job and solved it quickly, I'll call that out. It's really important to appreciate people's work and give them that positive reinforcement. And then I like to talk about what would it mean to solve this entire class of vulnerability when applicable. So the thing that I love about Fireside Bug Bounty is I think a lot of developers are actually quite naturally curious and want to know about security, and they just don't know how to get started. They don't know how to get into it. So when you make content like this available, they eat it up. People respond very, very well to this and are much more willing to work with you when you are regularly putting out, like, here are the vulnerabilities that we're seeing, here's how we fix them, and here's how we might fix this entire class of vulnerability. And for that last bullet point in particular, I think it's important because a lot of times fixing a class of vulnerability might take multiple quarters or even years of work if you have to re-architect major system components. And if you tell people about it early enough in these emails, then you just put it on their radar. You kind of plant this seed in their head that this is something the security team is thinking about, this is something that's important to them, and maybe 6 months down the line, that component happens to be going through a rewrite anyway. If you came to that design meeting and you said, hey, let's do this thing because it prevents this bug class, and that's the first time they've ever heard about it, they're not going to want to do that. It's a lot of extra work. They haven't heard this thing before. But if you have been talking about it regularly, if you brought it up in these past emails, if they are already aware of this issue, then I think they're going to be much more willing to work with you. Third example, again, the emails don't really matter here. I just wanted to include some pictures. So send out current happenings. When browsers started enforcing certificate transparency, I sent out an email about that, even though it's not super relevant for our organization. When we deployed preloaded strict transport security on our website, I sent out an email about that. When we had a quarter's worth of bug bounty data, I sent out an email about that. How many bugs have we resolved? How much money have we paid out? How responsive are we? How quickly do we deal with these issues? I think people really enjoy seeing these numbers and these statistics, or some of the other emails in general. And when they can see that you're working very hard and you're open about the work that you're doing, again, it'll put security top of mind for them. They're gonna include it in their considerations when they're doing other decisions in their day-to-day work. So yeah, just write up current security events and explain their significance. Make sure you know your audience. If you're working with, so Lob is mainly a web application security. We don't have a mobile app. We don't do anything else complicated. So mostly just regular backend engineers, and some of them might not be familiar with certificate transparency, for example. So make sure you know your audience when you're explaining your topics, so it's approachable for them. Hacking 101. Our company had an offsite to Palm Springs And we were doing all these exercises and workshops. They were trying to train people how to be a manager, how to, like, I don't know, all these other things. And so I thought, wouldn't it be fun to teach people some basic hacking techniques? And if you're familiar with the OWASP Juice Shop, it's a intentionally vulnerable web application that people can learn how to hack against. It's not the only one, there's others, but I like this one. So I taught everyone how to set it up on Heroku. They each had their own personal instance. I showed people how to install Burp Suite and configure it correctly. I actually sent out really detailed instructions of, like, literally step-by-step, like, click these buttons and enter these configuration settings, because I wanted to handhold the developers a little bit and make sure that they had a good experience. I think if somebody tried to, like, if I sent out this thing and they couldn't get the pre-work done, they might just get discouraged and give up. And I think if you guide them a little bit, then they'll have a great experience. And so this, I think, aside from the fact that developers enjoyed it, it also makes them better coders, right? If they see how to attack a cross-site scripting or an insecure direct object reference or something like that in somebody else's code, then the next time that they're writing a piece of code, they're going to think back to that and say, oh, I better check that the requesting user actually owns this object that they want to modify. NSA postcards. This is one of my favorite things that I did. What happened is in 2016, there was a government watchdog group that sent a Freedom of Information Act request to the NSA for all of their security propaganda posters from 1950s and 60s. Kind of like loose lips sink ships, if you've ever seen that one before. And it took them 2 years, but in 2018, the NSA responded. They gave these 136 posters, and to give you a sample of what they look like, here's one. It's some college graduates, and their plans for tomorrow depend on security today. Or another one is, it's a light bulb, and it says, let security light up your life. It's a little bit cheesy, but... So Lob's main product is a print and mail API. You can use this to print postcards, letters, and checks. So I used our own API to print all of these different postcards and mail them to our own office, and then I handed them out to different employees. And so that was really fun. I think people got a big kick out of that. And also I enjoyed this because all of the previous examples that I gave were really engineering-centric. They focused solely on engineering, and this one I think everyone got to enjoy. This talk was supposed to be about things that are easily replicable. I assume that most of you don't work at a print and mail startup, so I don't know that you could do this. But the idea is to get creative and maybe use your own product or come up with something that is going to be relevant for your organization that you know that your employees are going to enjoy. Security Conference Watch Party. I just set up a meeting every 2 weeks. We all get together at lunch and watch a security talk together. It's pretty easy. I send out a reminder the day before with a summary of the talk and the speaker, which means that I never will select a talk that I have not yet already watched. I try to curate content that I think will be good for people. That's not too long. If it's an hour or something, I think people get a little bit bored by the end. So I try to do 30-minute talks or less, not too technical, something that I know, again, is going to be appropriate for the audience. And I'll try to mix up the content. So for us, the thing that is most relevant is web application security, and a lot of times it is a web application security talk. But sometimes, one of the most popular talks that we had in terms of attendance was a video game console hacking talk or a car hacking talk. So that's not something that we're ever going to use in our day-to-day life, but people thought it was interesting and they attended the talk. I'll send out my slides later. These are just, if you want to use them, these are the talks that we've watched so far. Show and tell. We have this tradition at Lob. This wasn't even set up by me when I joined the company. They already had this. Every other week on Friday at the end of the day, it's 5-minute lightning talk presentations by any employee on any topic. So I love to use this as an opportunity to share some sort of security knowledge with folks. And every talk gets a technicality rating from 1 to 3. 1 is least technical, 3 is most technical. So I'll try to present different things that I think might be valuable to people. I presented on things like, should I use a VPN? Like, what does it actually protect me from, and what does it not protect me from, and what are the trade-offs? Or Chrome site isolation, or other things like that. Again, not really relevant for our day-to-day work, but I just want to be putting stuff out there that is personally interesting to me that I think other people will also enjoy. And I do think it reduces a lot, like I mentioned in the why section, it reduces the amount of friction that I get working with people. And then the last one I wanted to mention, security little wins. I send out a monthly email calling out all of the small security wins that we had over the previous month. So this is an example email. I know it's heavily redacted, but it'll just include the person's name at the beginning because, again, I want to celebrate their win and show them that I appreciate them. It'll include a line for a short description of what it is that they fixed, and maybe like a link to the Jira or the pull request or what have you. I had more things, but there's not enough time. I wanted to talk about a few things that didn't work. Two things in particular. One is security 20% time. If you're not familiar, a lot of companies have this concept of 20% time where you can work on something that is not your main project. It's just a little side project, maybe somehow still relevant to work. So what I thought I would do is I would look through our backlog of tickets, find ones that were easy starter tasks, not too much work, that were good candidates for 20% time, and I would tag them and send out emails to people saying, hey, if you're looking for a security 20% time talk project, here's something that you can work on. And in my time there, I've not had a single person take up a security 20% time task. And my theory is that people are already tired from work. If they want to work on some sort of side project, they have their own side project in mind. They don't want to work on someone else's side project. Maybe, I don't know. If you have more success with this, please let me know. But I never got anyone to fix one of these tasks. Another thing that didn't work too well, I think I didn't focus enough on non-engineering functions. You saw that most of my content was targeted towards engineers, and that's probably where most of my interactions are day to day. But at the company, as I've started to work on more things with outside functions like accounting, marketing, finance, HR, et cetera, I have noticed that I do get a lot of friction from them because they're not seeing any of this work that I'm putting out. They just see me show up to them and start making requests, and they don't like that. So guiding principles, like I mentioned, if we zoom out and think about like what are kind of the common themes between all of these examples that I presented, I think I would call out just three. The first one is add value. And when I say add value, I don't mean run a bug bounty program or like prevent RCEs, because that's just your normal, that's your job. I mean add value to individuals, teach them something new, put out informational and educational material that they'll enjoy reading, and they'll want to come back to you for more. Be visible. I'm constantly sending out emails, updates, Slack messages. Some companies do security scorecards. I think that works really well. There's this great quote, and I wish I knew who to attribute it to, but it goes something like, if you want an employee to internalize something, you have to repeat it so many times that you become sick of saying it, and that is when they will start to hear it. And I think that is very true. It takes people a lot of repeating people are busy, they have their own things going on, so I don't begrudge them for that. I think I'm the same way, probably everyone's the same way. But if you do want to get your point across, you should be very visible and constantly sending out these updates. And the last one is put the relationship first. So be available to people when they need help. Depending on your organization, this could be email or Slack. Some organizations do security office hours. I think that works pretty well. Security is a service role, I think, so you should think of employees as your customers and try to have good interactions with them, even if it sucks when the answer is no. But if you do have to say no, the way that you say no matters a lot. And also, this isn't just for work stuff. This isn't just for, I need a security review. Can you look at this design document? I have people come to me with questions like, my email got hacked, or how do I secure my accounts? Or I read this article about phone porting attacks. I don't know what to do. And I love it when people come to me with questions like that. I actively encourage them to come to me with those questions because, I do genuinely enjoy helping people, but also I think that, again, it helps build that trust. It helps me work with them later on when I want to implement some sort of other thing, and they know that I'm coming from a genuine place that I really do think this is going to improve the state of security somehow. So I started this talk with why does security culture matter? And it wasn't a particularly controversial position. I think that if I told everyone in this room that you could just snap your fingers and your company would have a culture of security, nobody would ever say no to that. The problem is that you all have other things to work on. You're all very busy people. So the better question is, how much should I prioritize security culture over my other work? And that is a much harder question to answer because that requires measuring the ROI of all of that work that you're putting in. And how do you measure the ROI of culture, right? That's very hard. So measuring culture is hard and subjective. I've tried a few things here. I've tried surveys. It works okay. I'm still trying to experiment with what might work best. If you have ideas, I would love to talk to you about it. I am anecdotally seeing improvements, especially in engineering. Again, I think it's easier to work with them now than it was in the past, but there's many factors to that, and it's also very hard to answer the counterfactual question of, if I had not spent that time working on these things, what would my interaction have gone like with that person? Would it have been worse or better? I will say that I think you should invest more at the beginning than at the end, because culture has momentum. If you invest a lot of time at the beginning and set up the right processes, and new employees are coming in and their peers are telling them, like, yes, make sure to get that security review, culture has this momentum and it'll just kind of keep going. So you invest a lot at the beginning, and after that you can kind of go on cruise control. But if you wait until it's too late, if you have a very large organization and you start trying to do this, it's going to be much harder. It's very hard to change the culture of a large organization. So I wanted to end this presentation with this tweet that I saw. It says, "InfoSec, nobody listens to security people. Also InfoSec, your password needs to be at least 15 characters long, contain numbers, upper and lowercase letters, at least 4 special symbols. You can't write it down, and you have to change it every 90 days. So I think there's been a real shift in the industry where I'm seeing a lot more tweets like this and talks like this one, where people are emphasizing this point that it is a service role. You have to be an enabling function for the business. It's not yes, but, it's yes, and help people do the things that they want to do safely. And I think those things are all true, but I think nobody talks about the point that there are a lot of people who work very hard to do that, probably many security practitioners in this room, who provide reasonable trade-offs, modern advice, they compromise with people, they meet people halfway every day, and it's still an uphill battle for them. It's still very, very hard. So I think my goal with this talk was to say that it's probably still going to be an uphill battle, but when you have a strong culture of security, it's going to be less steep. You're going to have less friction and resistance and pushback when you try to work with these other functions. And I think as an industry, if we keep moving in this direction, we are, I hope, going to get to the top of that hill. If you're interested in my tweets, there's my Twitter. Also, I'm hiring. If any of the things that I said resonated with you, please check out that bit.ly. And with that, I'll take questions.
Our first question from Slido is, do current happenings go to the whole company, your security champions, or something else?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Do your current happenings go to the whole company, or your security champions, or something else?
Great question, and it depends. They mostly go to security champions, things like certificate transparency and strict transport security preloading. I sent that out only to security champions. Sometimes there's things that I think are relevant for the whole company. Like back in September or October, Congress passed a law that made it free. The credit agencies were required to provide free credit freezes. And before that, they charged like a $10 fee. So when that happened, I sent out the entire company a note that said, hey, you can freeze your credit for free. You should go do this thing.
Next question from Slido is, when doing a hacking 101 class, how do you prevent the few security enthusiasts from taking the spotlight?
For me, it was pretty easy because I'm the only security person at the company. But if you were in a larger company that had more security people, then yeah, you have to take classroom dynamics into consideration. I don't know if I have a great answer for that.
Okay, and when will your slides be available? When will the slides be available?
I can publish them probably right after I get out of here. I'll tweet them out and I'll put them on my website.
And lastly, who is that tweet by? Who was that tweet by?
Oh, I mean, I intentionally censored the name. I wasn't trying to throw shade at this person. I do think I follow that person. I think they have good tweets. I just wanted to take a point on that tweet. So I'd rather not say.
Okay. Cool. Are there any other questions in the room? Great. Then on behalf of BSides San Francisco, I would like to thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you.